News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukatali.
And very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Zoom tonight. And on Zoom, joining us on Zoom is somebody whom I thought would be most relevant to the biggest topic around our times at the moment. That, of course, is that finally, after several years, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has or is resorting to a career central banker to head that wonderful and great and important institution in the form of Dr Nandalal Singh. Now, Dr Nandalal has worked with many sort of central bank institutions in terms of people. And one of such persons is, of course, the now retired, Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr W.A.Wijewardena. And he's joining us today by Zoom. Hello, good evening, Dr. Wijewardena, and thank you.
Good evening, Faraz. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure. But I am, of course, delighted that the calls of many people for several years has finally been heeded, and that the government of Sri Lanka are now returning to practice from the past, and that the governor of the central bank has been chosen from within its rank, and it's a career central banker. How do you react to that news?
So am I, Faraz, because this is the first time after year 2006, actually 2004, somebody from within the central bank has been appointed to that prestigious post. Usually in the past, it had always been a career central banker who had held that particular position. So I'm very glad that Dr Andalgir Singh, he is one of my former colleagues. He is returning to the central bank as the governor today. And as a result, I hope that he will be able to maintain the high standards and professionalism which central bank is expected to maintain for the sake of the nation and not the political leadership in this country for us. He's actually serving us and not the political masters who we are having in this country.
And Dr. Wijewardena, the appointing a person from within who was within the central bank to head it is great news because there's been a lot of calls for the central bank to be independent of politics. Having said that, what chances of real independence for the new governor and the central bank in terms of fiscal policy, for example?
Well, Faraz, if you look at the present economic situation in Sri Lanka, that is not the best that we could think of. Everybody knows that we are going through the worst economic crisis during the whole of the post-independent history of Sri Lanka today. As a result, a new governor will have an enormous challenge to first take control of the economic situation and then suggest and implement a policy measure program which would help him to take the central bank as well as the country out of the present mess. So we'll have to give him some time because we cannot expect him to do miracles overnight, but we'll have to give him some.
This whole issue of the current crisis, the dollar crisis. As we speak, Dr. Wijewardena, today we are not any sort of closer to resolving the political crisis. But what about the IMF then? Who will represent us at the IMF, and is the IMF likely to consider all this whilst we are in a sort of state of flux?
Well, Faraz, Dr. Veera Singh had been the alternative executive director of the International Monetary Fund from year 2010 to 2013. representing our group of countries, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan. So he has a lot of experience and exposure to the working in the IMF. And we don't have to have a finance minister right now because Dr. Andalgir Singh can start negotiating with IMF because the governor of the central bank is the alternate governor representing Sri Lanka in IMF. So therefore, he also has the same powers as the Minister of Finance with regard to the any negotiation with the government of Sri Lanka would be doing with IMF. So he has full powers and he has the ability. Therefore, I hope that he will immediately after assuming duties, he will start working on the project and starting the negotiation. But once the Minister of Finance is appointed, the Minister of Finance can join him. So there's no any obstacle for him to start working right now for us.
And of course, Dr. Nandalal is also experienced in matters with the IMF because he's also served there, hasn't he?
Yes, of course. That's why I said he was the alternative executive director for 3 years. And even before that, he was the director of economic research in the central bank. And he was the senior economist in charge of the international division of the central bank when I was in the central bank. And therefore, he had this exposure to IMF for I think more than 20 years. So that's a good experience for him to work with IMF. Therefore, he knows ABC of the matter involved. And he is in a position to handle this single-handedly without the support of a Minister of Finance today.
Good. Now, okay, if we move on to our current crisis, we have a dollar crisis, but we also have other sort of crises. We have petrol, the diesel, the kerosene, gas for cooking. The prices of say milk powder has gone through the roof, and that's because quite a lot of these is imported to Sri Lanka. And it's sad that even although we are a tropical island nation, we don't seem to be self-sufficient in fruit, and so much of fruit is imported into the country, and so on and so forth. So back in 2019, the unplanned nature of Sri Lanka's economy permitted the political agenda to win. And so there was a political victory. It was a political agenda that was successful, and the government was elected, the president was elected, and the parliament had a 2/3 majority. But all this at the expense of an unplanned economy. So what do we have to do now in terms of planning for the recovery, planning to get out of this mess?
You are correct, Faraz, when you say that the current all economic problems that we are facing, the root of all these economic problems is the shortage of foreign exchange in Sri Lanka. And also that was started not recently, but it was started around year 2010, when the government in power at that time had adopted a different kind of an economic strategy to develop Sri Lanka. That economic strategy was to base the economic policies on the domestic economy-based economic policies. Instead of promoting exports and earning foreign exchange, they were concentrating on the development of the domestic economy and thinking that the development of the domestic economy would create wealth, income and prosperity for the people. Ignoring the fact that Sri Lanka had been depending on international trade for all these factors for more than 3,000 years. So as a result, even though the exports increased in dollar terms, as a percentage of Farah's GDP, gross domestic product, they started falling. In 2005, it was 26% of GDP. 2010, it came down 15%. And in 2019, 19 it came down to around say 12%, and today it is around that level. So because of this reason, we have not been able to earn the necessary foreign exchange in order to maintain our import program. So as you say, the present crisis is completely a man-made crisis, because all other countries who also had been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic have been able to resolve this crisis without resorting to the type of short-term loans that we are getting from other countries. So it's a man-made crisis, and the crisis was exacerbated by the central bank's management, which took over the management year 2019, refusing to seek IMF assistance for that purpose, and also refusing to allow the exchange rate to fall according to the market demand and supply. Instead, they tried to maintain the exchange rate at 200 rupees per US dollar, which was artificial, and also it could not stand in the market because central bank did not have enough foreign exchange to meet it. And at the same time, they thought that they were following an alternative economic policy rather than the normal economic policy which the country had been following. And the Governor Lakshman had been telling us that people like us who had been critical of his policy had not been aware of the true meaning of this alternative economic policy. Then when it came to Governor Cabral, what he did was, instead of using the term alternative economic policy, he just used the term homegrown policy, and also this homegrown policy had not been announced by him anywhere. So what happened was, we had our foreign exchange balances, which amounted about say 7.6 billion US dollars as at the end of 2019, started to fall, and by today, I think at the end of March, the total usable foreign exchange balances of the central bank has been around say 300 to 400 million US dollars. So that is not sufficient even to import to Sri Lanka for 1 week's import requirement. So new governor will have to have a enormous challenge to reverse this situation, and that is why I said he cannot do miracles overnight, but we have to allow him time. But he has to be very quick and very fast, unless otherwise the whole country another crisis within very short.
I see. Now, what needs to be done for us to recover the economy? Perhaps I'll come back to you with that question with a little bit of a change after we go for this short break, in which time we should be looking at this evening's headlines from the Primetime News team. See you on the other side of the break.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Crowds flock to Parliament. Gazette on emergency law reversed. Tensions in Kurunegala amidst public protests. President will not resign, says Johnston.
ජනාධිපතිතුමාට 69 ලක්ෂයක් ඡන්දෙ දීලා තියෙනවා. අපි පැහැදිලිව කියන ආණ්ඩුවක් හැටියට ජනාධිපතිතුමා කිසිසේත්ම ඉල්ලාස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපි මේකට මුහුණ දෙනවා.
University Students' Unions round up Ministry of Health. Will there be delays in receiving diesel shipments? Will this cause longer blackouts?
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm in conversation with the former senior deputy governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. W.A.Wijewardena. Welcome back, Dr. Wijewardena. Now, Dr. Wijewardena, in terms of our economy, there was much said about what happened in the past, but let me just remind you, people were critical of the VAT reduction from 15 to 8%. There was a removal of various taxes. Corporation tax was brought down from 28 to 24%. And the PAYE system was completely changed. And the people were allowed to make their own returns and send their own taxes to the Inland Revenue Department. And also the income thresholds were sort of lifted, I suppose, or adjusted. So a lot of people were not in the in sort of income tax net, if you like. All this obviously affected and impacted our economy, because Sri Lanka found itself short of money, and then the pandemic, struck. What, Dr. Wijewardena, what should economically, what should be the most immediate plan?
Well, the most immediate plan for the new governor for us is that, we have this enormous foreign debt problem today. Many people think that it is only the debt obtained by the government of Sri Lanka had been our problem. No, it is a problem of the private sector as well as the corporation sector and the government, which had borrowed enormously from outside. So according to the latest data released by the central bank, within the next 12-month period, the total amount that we have to pay by way of debt repayment is about $9 billion. And as I told you at the beginning, our usable foreign reserves are now around say $400 billion. So that is not sufficient. So we are about to default our dollars for us. So the new governor's top priority should be to go for a debt restructuring immediately, number one. Then, along with the debt restructuring, he will have to get the IMF support to stand by us, because we have now allowed the rupee to have a free fall, and as a result, there is still not got sufficient confidence of the foreign investors in Sri Lanka. So if IMF stands by us with the loan facility, we will be able to inculcate this confidence in the minds of these foreign investors, so that we will be able to get the normal foreign exchange inflows to the country. But those are the most immediate priorities of the new government. But at the same time, what he has to do, as you have already mentioned, had been presented to Sri Lanka government by way of a report filed by the IMF staff under the article that had prevailed prior to year 2019. That is because with the tax concessions the government had offered, as you had explained very correctly now, the government of Sri Lanka had lost about 4% of GDP by way of tax revenue in year 2020. The same amount has been lost in 2021. We are going to lose it in 2022, and till about say 2026, we are going to make this loss. So new governor will have to make the recommendation and prevail upon the Ministry of Finance to go back to the in tax system. So they should be abolished, then we have to go back to the old system. In addition to that, the IMF has recommended the central bank will have to tighten monetary policy because the inflation is rising now. Officially it is around 19%, but according to the independent compilers of global inflation, like Professor Steve Hanke of Johns Hopkins University in USA, inflation rate has risen to around 59% by the end of March. So this is a very high inflation, and that has also risen because the central bank has allowed the money supply to go up, which the ordinary people refer to as money printing, by 3 trillion Sri Lankan rupees, or 40%, which would again build up to the inflation, and as well as it will cause the exchange rate to fall in the country. Then most important thing which the IMF has recommended in the report is that the government will have to ensure the independence of the central bank. Now that is not a difficult task, because under Dr. Veera Singh, when he was the senior deputy governor in the central bank, a new central banking act was prepared, drafted, and it was actually accepted by the previous Yahapalana government for enactment, and it was gazetted, and it's just a matter of take it out and re-gazette and present to Parliament and have it approved, because that had been approved by the previous Yahapalana government, and once the new government came to power in 2019, they have just shelved it. So Dr. Veera Singh will have to get the government to re-enact it, and those are the most immediate matters related to the financial sector as recommended by the IMF. And actually, for us, those are the preconditions for us to seek an IMF facility at this present stage.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. Now, also, our president, in his speech, he said that he's not responsible for that, and that he blamed basically. He placed the blame of the state of the economy at the doorstep of the CV-19, the pandemic. But sometime after that, the Bangladeshi foreign minister was quoted as saying that they've actually increased their reserves, for example. I'm not trying to this is not a comparative question between the Bangladeshi economy and ours. But what I'm asking you is that how much of time do you think was wasted in this government's flirting and therefore the misunderstanding of the COVID issue by going towards these traditional but untried and untested so-called magic potions to get rid of COVID, like the penny, some Dhammika penny, and casting pots into flowing waters of rivers, and so on and so forth. And these very ministers who did that then succumbed to COVID, and thank goodness they were able to get the required, treatment in time. And so how much of time and money do you think has it cost the economy?
Well, far as we have wasted the last 2 years, in fact 24 months. In fact, even though President says that he's not responsible for the current economic malaise, I will have to say that this is basically due to the bad economic management by the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, with respect to the exchange rate, with respect to money printing, with respect to handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, with respect to allowing the budget to balloon, the budget deficit, losing revenue, and if you take, and also the trying to convert Sri Lanka's agriculture to organic farming overnight, and all these factors are all man-made factors for us. So therefore, the countries which actually did not resort to that type of policy pressures had not been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. As you say, the Bangladesh had actually recovered from it very quickly. India has recovered. Even our neighboring country, Maldives, has recovered. So what this means is that it's a man-made crisis, and all of us will have to now pay for it, and all of us will have to get together to come out of this crisis today.
I mean, the fertilizer issue, the whole world, the organic produce is less than 1.7%. That's the global average. Less than 1.7%. That's for organic produce. But this president and his team banned the importation of chemical fertilizers overnight, going for the big figure, 100%. how on earth any advisors can stand worth their salt? How can they stand there and assure a man who doesn't know about the agriculture sector that this is the best way and we can achieve 100%? The whole world is only less than 1.7%. How do you...
That's the mistake done by Gotabaya Rajapaksa's administration, Paras, because even if we do it over a period of time, say 10 years, the highest level of organic farming that we can attain is about 10 to 15%. That is because we have 22 million mouths to be fed, and we have to produce foods for those 22 million mouths, and we cannot produce the entirety of the food requirement to feed those mouths by just using organic farming, because Sri Lanka doesn't have land. We have gone for the intensive farming rather than extensive farming. So we'll have to use the modern technology, modern scientific practices to develop the agriculture of the country. So that was I think one of the follies among many which Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration had done. As a result, now we are in this particular economic crisis today.
And let me take you back to something else. When we are negotiating, or when our governor, the new governor designate, or when he negotiates with the IMF, or when he's part of the team that is perhaps going to the IMF, do you think that the IMF will also look at some of the wider issues, like, for example, corruption, and therefore it may also lead to this situation where the central bank was very much part of that scam? It may have been a victim, but it was, it happened there. And that's, of course, the bond scam. And despite all the promises made, and I know you've been on Newsline several times. In fact, that's where we met. Will they look at this thing and think that Sri Lanka's judiciary is either not strong enough, or that the Attorney General's department have not done enough, or something on those lines, and even the executive presidency? Because there have been many claims that about 106 pages of that Bond Commission report has never been released to the Speaker or to anyone else. And those 106 pages may well hold the key as to who benefited from the payments made by that particular group of companies.
Well, for us, I think for the purpose of getting an IMF facility today, we will not be able to, the IMF will not actually insist on that right now. But what would happen is that those kind of governance issues would definitely be one of the long-term policy measures which Sri Lanka has to adopt in order to come out of this particular problem, because the governance is at the top of the agenda of the IMF and the World Bank when it comes to provide funding to or assistance to any country. So those are very basic matters which the government of Sri Lanka will have to resolve. But for the purpose of the present loan facility to be obtained from the IMF, I don't think that it will be a deterrent for Sri Lanka.
I know that we're coming to the end of our program, but we are also in the Parliament is in a process to sort of form an interim government or a continuing government or whatever. But whilst that is going, may I ask you, Dr. Wijewardena, how important is it to ensure that this caretaker government or the next government will have ministries and ministers who are somehow conversant in the activities of that ministry? Well, the direct question is, how important is it not to have family members and henchayas to be given top ministerial posts, because of political considerations and abandoning the planned economic agenda?
Well, it is very important for us because without that, the Sri Lanka will not be able to come out with this present crisis, because it is like for us, if I quote an example, it is just like watering a sinking well, because whatever the money that is being spent on will be wasted, and it will not produce the required level of the productivity and the output for the country. Therefore, I am sure that the government of Sri Lanka, the new government which is to be formed, will have to take it very seriously and address that issue before it does any other thing, because otherwise any IMF program will stand to fail if we don't have these type of governance issues sorted out before that.
And also, I suppose that the world at large will be looking at who runs what in Sri Lanka and looking to see their qualifications or their expertise. Unfortunately, although Sri Lanka is a myopic society where yesterday's perpetrators of crime are today's legislators, and we have got several instances of that. But we've also had, former convicts being pardoned and then given positions in government bodies, which perhaps might not augur well for our international trading relationships.
I agree with you. I mean, as I told you, it is a confidence building exercise that we have to do immediately. And outsiders would look at us not on the basis of, the sympathy that we should receive from them, but on the basis of the practices and the management systems that we have introduced. So in that context, any of the things that the government has done in the past will have to be reversed, and which should not be repeated. And those are very important matters for Sri Lanka to get out of this crisis and attain this long-term development which we all are now aspiring for us.
Well, on that note, Dr. Wijewardena, thank you very much for being on Newsline Zoom. And we look forward to welcoming you in our studios soon. We hope that you'll make us the first port of call once you break your own rule to only do, because of COVID. I hope that you and your family are keeping well.
Okay. Thank you.
And on that note, it's back to the studio now, and it's time for the primetime news. So, as always, I shall wish you all a very good evening, and God bless you all.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.